make sure I'm recording this so we can send you all the recording. Today's presentation will focus on constructing and using tables. My name is Danny Shapiro, and I'm on the marketing team here at Hawks Learning. Our speakers are once again, Crystal Trapani and Kristen White of Old Dominion University. Professor Kristen White is an instructional technologist with the Center for Learning and Teaching at ODU. She's the university's lead Zoom trainer. Kristen has been an integral part of ODU's transition to remote teaching during COVID-19 and continues to develop and facilitate faculty support on topics including Zoom, Blackboard, VoiceThread, Kaltura, and other instructional technologies via workshop, consultations, videos, and support documentation. While building online interactive activities for faculty, she has noticed the absence of basic accessibility knowledge and does her best to inform and educate others on how to make content accessible for all learners. Crystal Trapani is an instructional technologist with the Center for Learning and Teaching and is an adjunct instructor in the Department of English at ODU. Crystal has crafted tech-forward activities in her composition courses over the last 12 years. She blends her experience working with first-generation and non-traditional students, curriculum development, creating interactive and accessible online course content, and training and mentoring faculty in order to help them achieve positive student outcomes and success. In working with faculty, she helps her colleagues gain strong working knowledge of how to make course content successful for students of all learning abilities. Crystal continues her commitment to teaching so she can share her personal classroom experience with faculty. We're excited, as I said, to have you back for the second part of our series. If you did not catch the first part, that is available for replay already on our website. Again, this is being recorded and we will send you all a recording. And on that note, I will go ahead and hand it over to you both.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. So today we're actually going to talk about working through constructing and using tables. Are you using your tables properly? Did you know you should not be using tables for layout purposes? Did you know constructing tables in Google Drive and Microsoft Office can be difficult? However, there are ways that you can make your tables successful and usable for students of all learning abilities. And so when you start thinking about accessibility, it's not about disability at all. Accessibility is about the ability and making things easier for everybody. And odds are you're relying on things in your day-to-day life that are accessibility things. For example, when you go to the grocery store and you walk through those big automatic doors, or when you go to leave, you take your cart to the curb cut, those are accessibility things. If you're watching a movie late at night and you don't want to wake somebody in the next room, you might have the subtitles on. And so accessibility has a lot of impacts to it. Visibility includes those who have limited or no vision, and they might be using screen readers, high contrast settings, and document structure really helps these individuals out a lot. And we will be talking about that in particular a lot today. Audibility helps those who have low or no hearing. And so you want to make sure you're either providing captions or if you're in a face-to-face kind of presentation mode, you want to make sure you've got an interpreter. And then mobility, you have physical mobility, and that would be a loss of range of motion. And more importantly, also electronic mobility, which is another thing we will be talking about today. Electronic mobility means that something is accessible to someone on no matter what type of technology they're using, be it a computer or a smartphone, they need to be able to access that technology. And finally, cognition is the middle action or process of kind of processing knowledge and understanding it through the learning experience. And so we've made up a little chart, shows you kind of different ways in which accessibility helps everyone. And it's important to recognize that accessibility is not just someone who has a learning difference. Things like having a broken arm, that's technically an accessibility issue. If they're working somewhere that's noisy, we have students who do all of their work in a coffee house. We have students who do their work in the car in McDonald's parking lot. Those are things that are accessibility issues. And so you want to make sure, particularly why it's important to make sure your stuff is accessible, and not just because we want to help all of our students learn, but also because it's federal law. 508 mandates that any institution that is receiving federal funding is putting out content that meets accessibility standards. And any content that you're delivering to your students in any digital method, be it Blackboard, Canvas, Google Docs, or however else you're getting your documents to your students, it must meet 508 standards. And so accessibility doesn't have to be a mystery. And we realize that many people aren't sure how to make their course fully accessible. And we're going to kind of help you out on how to do that with tables today.
So the tragic table or history of tables. Tables were actually originally used as a visual design to sort data into categories. But over time, people have started using tables incorrectly for layout. When possible, you should avoid layout tables and use built-in features like lists. However, if you are using a layout table, it's imperative that you design in a linear fashion, as a screen reader will read from left to right and top to bottom. But how do you determine if your table is a data or a layout table? A good way to ascertain if you are or you should be using a table or not is to ask yourself two questions. One, if you read the data in a data cell, do you need other information to explain how it relates to other data in the cells? If so, it's a data table. Two, does the material consist of information that is sequential or self-explanatory? If so, it's a layout table and it should be formatted in another way, such as a list. For layout tables within Microsoft, headers should not be used, which means there is no identification which column someone is in when using a screen reader. Formatting, such as headers, that a sighted reader uses is read out loud to help someone with visual differences. Headers are used in data tables to notify the screen reader user what column they're in, what the name of the column is, and the information that is in the cell. Whereas files created in Google Drive still identify where the user is within the table, even when header rows and/or columns are not identified. Screen readers essentially ignore the fact that content is inside of a table if it's a layout table. The layout or the screen reader just reads the content in the literal order. Again, left to right and top to bottom. According to WebAIM, in reality, layout tables do not pose inherent accessibility issues. There are certainly many worse things that you could do in terms of accessibility. People with all kinds of disabilities can easily access layout tables as long as the tables are designed with accessibility in mind, ensuring proper linearized reading order, content scaling, etc. So for this layout table, if you did not set the header row and you are in Microsoft, it would literally read questions to decide which holiday side dishes to include at your event. 1, will there be any vegetarians or vegans? 2, and it will continue on. So it doesn't identify to the screen reader user where they are. But as you can see, this could have been a numbered list just as easily. It doesn't need to be in a table. So that's what we're referring to. And we're saying if it's something that isn't needing to refer to, other cells, it's a layout table. And does it really need to be a table then? When you hear alternative text, you probably don't think of tables. However, any table used for data requires alternative text for context. Tables used for layout should never have alternative text because the content is read again linearly and provides the context itself. This is the case for documents created in Microsoft or Google Drive, but if adding a table within your LMS, alternative text is not always an available option. You may be able to add a caption or title to your table there, though. Accessible tables need a clear table structure and table headers to help guide a screen reader user. When using table headers, you should do the following. 1, always mark the first row and/or column as the header. A screen reader moves horizontally along a row and reads the contents of the column header. This allows a user to view the title of the column without having to navigate back up to the first row to remember what column they were on. It allows the user to remember how the table is organized. Mark the first column as the header if its content is needed for emphasis or context for the rest of the row. If a student is reviewing a course schedule for the semester, having the first column read first, which dictates the week of the semester, is helpful for the screen reader user. Headers are meant to orientate the user with the table. And when a user navigates a column vertically, the screen reader will read the row header if it is appropriate. And number 2, ensure that every cell has data, especially in the header row and/or column, as a screen reader needs to provide the individual with the context. A table should never be an image, screenshot, or scan from a textbook. These images are actually completely inaccessible to a screen reader. Even with alternative text, tables that are images are impossible to follow as keyboard navigation is not available. While you should never really use an image for a table for the reasons we just stated, if you absolutely cannot avoid it, it's imperative you describe what should be interpreted from the table, as the user cannot navigate to understand the data. Additionally, you need to provide enough information while not overwhelming someone. Remember that a screen reader will break up the flow of information to read the table image if you're using a screenshot of a table. And if there is too much alternative text for the table, the individual reviewing the information may lose key details if too much information is provided, as they can't navigate those cells of the table since the table is an image. If the explanation would be deemed overwhelming for someone, you should look at breaking up the table into multiple simple tables instead, so that the information can be properly digested. If it cannot be described concisely in a sentence or two in alternative text, it should be added as information in your document, whether that's before, after, or next to your table. If you're using images of tables from a publisher that you have copyright permissions for, you can check with the company to verify if they have any alternative text that can be used. While we're stressing making tables accessible for students using assistive technology, it's also important to consider how tables impact your typically abled students, specifically electronic mobility, which is another form of accessibility. Many of our students are using mobile technology, such as smartphones and tablets, to complete their coursework. While an image of a large table may be aesthetically pleasing and be easier to present to students, it is difficult for students using mobile technology to access. So we've created a couple short videos about what it is like if we are using the screen reader with tables. So the first one's going to focus on Microsoft Word simple tables, and we are going to take a look at how some of the pieces of the tables might not work or be as easy to understand. To better understand why your table construction is so important, let's take a look at 2 examples of the same information constructed in 2 different tables within a Microsoft Word document. We will be using an assistive technology known as a screen reader to identify how your design can affect the way information is conveyed to learners. While listening to the first example, try to identify items that made it more difficult to understand the context of the content being provided.
Out of table heading level 1 bad table example table with 10 rows and 3 columns level 1 row 1 column 1 week column 2 assignments column 3 due date column 4 row 2 column 1 1 column 2 review syllabus column 3 sept 19 column 4 column 1 row 3 column 2 read chapters 1 3 row 2 column 3 row 3 column 4 row 2 column 1 row 4 column 2 post introduction to discussion board row 2 column 3 row 4 column 4 row 5 column 1 2 column 2 read, chapters 4 and 5 column 3 sept 26 column 4 column 1 row 6 column 2 watch, the punishable perils of plagiarism row 5 column 3 row 6 column 4 row 5 column 1 row 7 column 2 weekly article 1 do row 5 column 3 row 7 column 4 row 8 column 1 3 column 2 read, chapters 6 8 column 3 October 3 column 4 column 1 row 9 column 2 rough draft of rhetorical analysis do row 8 column 3 row 9 column 4 row 8 column 1 row 10 column 2 weekly article 2 do row 8 column 3 row 10 column 4.
Before we identify the main issues with the first table's construction, let's listen to the same information from a better constructed table. See if you can identify any elements you may have missed in the first example that make the content easier to understand in this table.
Heading Level 1 Good Table Example English 101 Course Schedule Table has long description with 4 rows and 3 columns. Level 1 Row 1 Column 1 Week Column 2 Assignments Column 3 Due Date Column 4 Row 2 Column 1 Week 1 Column 2 Review Syllabus Read Chapters 1 to 3 Post Introduction to Discussion Board Column 3 September 19th Column 4 Row 3 Column 1 Week 2 Column 2 Read Chapters 4 and 5 Watch The Punishable Perils of Plagiarism Weekly Article 1 Due Column 3 September 26th Column 4 Row 4 Column 1 Week 3 Column 2 Read Chapters 6 to 8 Rough Draft of Rhetorical Analysis Due Weekly Article 2 Due Column 3 October 3rd Column 4 Out of Table.
The first table was more difficult to understand when using a screen reader than the second table for multiple reasons. 1. It lacked row headers, which should be identified from the Table Design tab, Table Style Options section at the upper left of the window. This provides context for learners with low or no vision regarding associations between data in the table and their appropriate row and/or column headers. Number 2. Additionally, a table title and alt text were missing from the first table. You can access these settings via the table properties by right-clicking the table and selecting Table Properties. Within the Alt Text tab, you can see this table was missing a title and alternative text description, which is read out loud as a preview before the table data to help a user determine if they would like to hear the entire table or skip the information. You can also view table properties by first selecting a table, then navigating to the Layout tab, and finally, at the top left of the window, under the Table section, select Properties. Within the Alt Text tab, you can see this table did have a title and alternative text description. 3. Cells within the first and last columns, week and due date, were merged. And although the screen reader identifies they are merged cells, it was harder to follow as the week was only read before and the due date was only read after the first assignment listed in the table. 4. The first column, week, only used a number in each cell, which made it more difficult to understand than the second table that added the word week before each number. 5. Within the middle column assignments, when a string of chapters was to be read, a dash was used in between the chapter numbers, which was less clear than adding the word to in between to provide more context. And 6. Within the last column, due date, abbreviations were used for the months, which made it more difficult to understand than when the full month's names were used in the second table. While avoidance of merged cells, split cells, empty cells, use of abbreviations and dash symbols are recommended and will help learners using an assistive technology better understand the content, the only requirements for accessibility are to identify the row and/or column headers, include data in all header cells, and include a title and description within the Alt Text Table Properties tab for the table. And it is slightly different in PowerPoint, which we'll go over when we do more of the demonstration piece. But regarding the, this is Word only, there are some similarities, but now we're going to take a look at Google Slides. To better.
Surely, there it is.
Now let's take a look at some table examples in Google Slides as Microsoft and Google differ slightly. To better understand why your table construction is so important, we will be using an assistive technology known as a screen reader to identify how your design can affect the way information is conveyed to learners. Let's take a look at 2 examples of the same information constructed in 2 different tables within Google Slides. While listening to the first example, try to identify items that make it more difficult to understand the context of the content being provided.
Table examples Google Slides Google Chrome. Table 6 rows 3, columns row 1 column 1 merged cell 1 row high 3 columns wide sedation treatment options row 2 column 1 merged cell 5 rows high 1 column wide insomnia column 2 pain column 3 depression row 3 column 2 gabapentin column 3 mirtazapine row 4 column 2 amitriptyline column 3 doxepin row 5 column 2 doxepin column 3 trazodone row 6 column 3 amitriptyline selected.
Before we identify the main issues with the first table's construction, let's listen to the same information from a better constructed table. See if you can identify any elements you may have missed in the first example that make the content easier to understand in this table.
Text selection table. Good example. Title selected. Table 1, sedation treatment options for insomnia when paired with another diagnosis. Text box selected. Table 2 rows 3, columns row 1 column 1 pain column 2 depression column 3 anxiety disorders row 2 column 1 gabapentin amitriptyline doxepin column 2 mirtazapine doxepin trazodone amitriptyline column 3 mirtazapine doxepin trazodone amitriptyline hydroxyzine temazepam selected.
The first table was more difficult to understand when using a screen reader than the second table for multiple reasons. 1. It lacked row headers, which should be identified to provide context for learners with low or no vision regarding associations between data in the table and their appropriate row, and if needed, column headers. It's important to note that this can only be accomplished using the grapple add-on by selecting Tag next to the table you would like to work on. Then you select the header or headers, first row, first column, or both to properly identify what information should be associated with the data cells. Finally, select Update. 2. Cells within the first row and first column were merged, and although the screen reader identified they were merged cells, it was harder to follow as the first row was more like a caption or title, and insomnia was only read once and hard to associate properly with the other diagnoses. Whereas on the slide with the second table, a text field was added above the table to provide a title or caption to eliminate the need for those merged cells. 3. An empty cell was included in the pain column, which would be confusing to someone using a screen reader as it identified the cell but had no data or information to provide the learner. 4. Additionally, the table was missing a title and alternative text, which can be set by selecting the table, right-clicking, selecting Alt Text from the drop-down menu, and then you can add the title and description. Alternative text should be added to the description field. Once you're done, select the OK button. The first example had neither the title or description, but if we take a look at the second table, you can see that the title and description were both included. It's important to note that the title and alternative text are only available in Google Slides and not in Google Docs. While avoidance of merged cells, split cells, empty cells, use of abbreviations and dash symbols are recommended and will help learners using an assistive technology better understand the content, the only requirements for accessibility are to identify the row and/or column headers, include data in all header cells, and include a title and description within the alt text option for the table. As noted earlier, the alt text option is unavailable in Google Docs. Now let's take a look at some. So one other thing to talk about, and I'm actually giving a link if you are on a Windows machine, JAWS has a free trial for Windows at least, but it is a paid subscription. They've actually changed it more recently. But if you are looking to want to test anything and you are on a Windows machine, WebAIM has a direct link and instructions on how to do that as well. In Microsoft Word specifically, if you have a long, simple table, meaning it is going to span over more than one page, so it's divided wherever a page break occurs, you can make adjustments to the table so that the table headings are repeated on each page. And this is important. Repeated table headings are visible only in print layout view and when you print the document. The first thing you do would be to select the heading row or rows. The selection must include the first row of the table and right-click to select the table properties from the drop-down menu. Then you would select the row tab from the table properties pop-up and make sure you uncheck allow row to break across pages and make sure repeat as header row at the top of each page is selected. And then you simply select OK to be done. So again, Microsoft and Google products are really not well equipped to handle complex tables. So most of what we have talked about today are simple. They have one, either one row header or one column header, but they aren't nested. So a complex table is one where there are two rows of headers that must be referenced to understand the relevance of the corresponding data cells. Tagging a complex table often takes additional hours of work, and they are rarely tagged properly. It is often substantially easier or faster to break the table up into several simple tables than it is to attempt to tag a complex table in a more appropriate software such as a PDF.
All right, so if you were with us yesterday, we're going to do the same thing today. We're going to invite you all to either use the QR code or use the URL, and we're going to work on some documents together. If you are taking the URL, just note that it is case sensitive, and we will, if you could give us on the participants window a yes to let us know once you've got it open. And if you're having problems, go ahead and getting it open, go ahead and hit the no button so we can, either Kristen and I can help you out and let you get that working for you. Yes, I'll pop the link in the chat too.
I was going to do that too. Sorry.
Oh, you got it?
In a second. Yep. I'm getting it. Unfortunately, Zoom doesn't let us make these accessible links for you.
Yeah. That's a conversation for Friday. And once you're in that folder, we're actually going to start with the Google Docs and the Word doc. So, and we are going to be also using that PowerPoint and the slides too. So if you want to take a minute, get everything open. And again, if you're having any problems, just give us a shout out in the chat and we'll do our best to help you out.
And for the I would suggest, if you can, actually download the Word in PowerPoint rather than just trying to open it through Google, because there won't be the same capabilities if you are just opening it using Google.
Yep. So anybody need a little bit more time? We're good to go. Go once, twice.
The Word doc is in the same folder. It should be called Word Handout Tables, and it's got the W symbol. So if you right click that and select download, if you're not familiar, you would right click the actual document and you can download, or I think you can also use the three dots if you are in the list layout.
All right. Let's go ahead and get started. Again, if you're still having problems, just put it in the chat. Kristen will catch up with you and we'll go from there. We also suggest, if you're working on two monitors, that's great. You put one thing on one monitor and one on the other. If you're not, you can split your screen so you can have two documents side by side. For those of you who are Windows users, if you hit that Windows key on the bottom left of your keyboard and the either right or left arrow key, that will let you split your screen with one document on one side and one on the other. Mac users, there's those little three dots at the top of your window. The third one over from the left, so if you had 1, 2, 3, it's either green or gray depending on your interface, and that will let you also kind of tile two side by side, so you can have zoom up on one side and the document you're working on the other. All right, so we're going to actually start in the Word document. And we have provided a bunch of resources here, a checklist for making your documents accessible. Here is a slide deck that actually will talk about kind of how to prioritize making your course documents accessible, because we know, especially for those of you who are meeting us all day or all week, this week and next week, we know we're throwing a lot of stuff at you and you're a little overwhelmed. Where do I start? And so we do have kind of a priority checklist for where do you get started? How do you start? For those of you who are interested in Grackle, we are going to talk about Grackle a lot. Grackle does not sponsor us. We just think it's a great product. We have a guide for how to use Grackle. And for particular table resources, we've provided tons of links here, Microsoft support, Google Help, and just various institutions across the US about how to make your tables accessible and make your course content successful for all your students.
And Crystal, can I interject one thing? On
Sure can.
some of those links, we did include links specifically about the HTML pieces. So if you are in your LMS and have the ability to get to the actual code, you can also verify that your tables are meeting accessibility through the HTML. We are not going to be covering that in our presentation today, but we have provided you some links that go across that way as well.
Yeah, because we are sure that some of you out there do have access to that, but we also know some of you don't. So certainly feel free to use that information. So you're going to notice this is that chart that Kristen showed you in the video. And just to kind of refresh and reiterate, we know we need to check, is there alt text? So we would select this. It looks like a little square here with a plus in it. We'll right click that, table properties. Our alt text is empty, so we know we need to fix that. We can go ahead and check the table design, and we notice we have no header row marked, so that's something we need to fix. We know having this one here that's ambiguous, and that's going to be difficult for a student who's using the screen reader to understand. We know we've got to fix that dash. We know we've got to spell out September. And I wanted to show you where Kristen talked about having the table kind of split across 2 pages. This is what she was talking about. So the screen reader is going to go to the next page and not reread currently that header row. So what we would need to do is we would need to go, so I'm just clicked in what is my header row, and I'm going to tell it table properties, and I'm going to go to row, and I'm going to tell it, I want you to repeat that header row at the top of each page. And so now that screen reader is going to reread that. And I just wanted you guys to see that, because that is something I know, particularly those of you who are teaching something like accounting, you might have a long table that might span across 2 pages. So let's look at our fixed one. We have gone ahead, we put the week there, we fixed the cells. We went ahead and said, let's make this instead of 3, let's make it one long one. And we said, let's go ahead and split these cells back up. I only want 1 column, but I need 3 rows. And so that obviously is making it match. And we would go ahead and combine all that together just to make the one. Spell out September, go ahead and put our weeks there. And this reads much easier for, honestly, not just your students using screen readers. At a glance, this is easier for your students in general read, because you have captured everything together that belongs to that week. Particularly those of you who are teaching accelerated semesters, maybe a summer semester. I know some institutions have winter semesters. You might have a lot due each week just because it's an accelerated semester. So if you could imagine having, maybe all of this is just 1 week versus 2, that's going to get arduous to even a learner with typically able skills. It's going to get hard for them to read. And so let's look at this chart. And this is the one I'm going to invite you all to kind of participate in the chat and work through it together, because Kristen and I both think that most people learn better doing than versus hearing. So what kind of things do we know we want to check in this first chart? What do we want to fix? Or what do we need to check? We'll put it in the chat. Merge cells. Absolutely. We know we got to fix those merge cells. Check if there's alt text. Yes, check for alt text, check for those merge cells, label that first column, right? We've got that empty cell up here. And so let's talk about how we could fix this. We got the empty cell. Let's start with our merge cells. So I'm in here under Studio, and I'm just going to right click, and I'm just going to tell it split. And I said, go ahead, I want 1 column and 2 rows. And so now I'm just going to copy paste that Disney down. And again, we're going to do it for also universal. So we're going to split those cells 1 and 2. We're going to fix universal. And here we could name it anything, but let's go ahead and name it, the film title. And then we also know we need to check that alt text. So let's see what we got here. Table properties. We go to alt text. We have no alt text there. So depending on context, it's for where this chart's being used. It's going to depend on what our alt text is. But for the sake of this sample, I'm going to say top grossing films. And then for my alt text, maybe I'll just say something about, maybe this was from a reading comparing the studio. So I could say top grossing animated films from Disney, Universal, and Disney Pixar. I'll go ahead and save that. And another thing we need to check, we need to see, is our table, have we assigned it a header row? And we have not. So we're going to go ahead and click that table design and click header row. And so now we've told it, hey, screen reader, please and thank you, read this whole row when you're reading through that content to help our students learn. Now you could also, and when I first looked at this chart, I said, oh, this might be better is 2 charts. And particularly, I know we've said a lot about, don't be afraid to break up a complex chart into 2 charts. It might be easier for your students to understand, and we certainly could do that. So we could say, okay, well, maybe we want to divide this up into a chart about the film, the release year in the studio, and then maybe we want another chart talking about gross and budget. So we could go insert table, and we could go 1, 2, and we got, so we're going to do the 3 across for the film, release year, studio, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so now we can go ahead and put into this. We could say film, we could say release year, studio, and then I'm just going to go Frozen. I'm just going to do the first couple, 2013, and then Disney, and I'll go ahead and this one, Zootopia, 2016, and Disney. And obviously we would do the whole thing, but again, we would go ahead and we say, hey, I want this to have a header row, and I'm telling it, hey, this first row, that's my header row. I would, just like I did before, I would go ahead and put in my alt text as soon as it stops fighting me. Table properties, alt text, and I would, same thing, enter in the alt text there. You certainly could. Somebody asked in the chat, could you change that first column to Frozen 2013 Disney? And actually, when Kristen, because Kristen made these the sample charts, when I first looked at it, that was actually my thought on how we would fix it, was to do, as Steve suggested in the chat, say in the first column, Frozen 2013 Disney. You certainly could do that. That would be fair. But that is how we would fix this chart in Microsoft Word. Google Docs.
I was going to say the only reason that might not be as clear is that they are not being identified. What is 2013? When you don't have it in its own column, it's not, it won't have any, unless you had film, comma, like your actual header told them that it was film year studio. If it just said film and then it said Frozen 2013 Disney and that's what they heard, they wouldn't know what that, yes, they heard 2013 Disney, but what is that associated with? What, what is the meaning or context behind that? Might be a little bit less clear. But there are ways that you can obviously do it different. One other thing I'm sorry I was going to mention is, as you can see in that one that Crystal was just taking the gross from, is that you couldn't obviously tell that there were no table headers, because what did we do? We formatted it in a larger bold font. But that doesn't mean it has a table header. So that's why it's real, just because it looks a certain way and it helps your visual, your visual learners, it will still need to be identified as a header row. So we're not saying don't add the additional formatting or the color or any of that, but you do need to make sure that the header row is identified.
Yeah, and to address what Kristen said, I went ahead, I clarified here. I just clarified that cell. I said, this is what is here. And as Eva just said in the chat, it would also depend on what information you're trying to convey in the table, what would be the appropriate way to condense it, or even if it would be appropriate or not. All right, so let's go ahead and go to our Google Docs. Same thing, I'm not going to go through all the sources because they're exactly the same. And if you have not already done so, you're probably going to want to make a copy of this and add this to your own drive. So you're going to go File, and you're going to go to make a copy right here, and that will put a copy in your own Google Drive for you to use and access and edit on your own. So give everybody just a second. You just go to File and make a copy, and that will put it in your drive. And if you're having trouble, just give us a shout out in the chat, and either me or Kristen will get out to help you out. Okay, nobody's saying anything in chat, so we'll get rolling. Again, same chart, so I'm not going to go through. I'm not going to be like, so let's talk about the things that are wrong, because we know at this point. Something that's important to note, though, and this is a big difference between Kristen, just threw the directions in for me.
Sorry.
Kristen, you got Jen in the chat.
Yep.
Thank you. A big difference between Google Docs and Word docs is you cannot add alt text to tables in Google Docs. So what you have to do is you either need to make sure you provide a very clear title or a caption before or after the chart. That is, unfortunately, that is a issue that Google has, that they have not fixed that yet. Row headers, you have to use Grackle to get them to tag them. So if you're using Grackle, so we're going to go Grackle Docs, and I'm going to launch it. And it's going to take it just a second to run the check. There we go. And then here it says, hey, you didn't tag this table. And so I can tell it I want to locate this table, and it says, hey, you're looking at this one. And I hit this tag button, and it will give me the pop-up that allows me to tag the table. And so I want to go ahead and mark that first row as the header row, and I'm telling the screen reader, hey, screen reader, please associate this first row with the column it's attached to. And when I click update, that actually saves it. I'm not going to dwell on that one because that's the one that needs help. Again, we know we've got to unmerge those cells. We know we've got the splits going on. So let's look at how we would fix that. Again, we would this exactly similar. We could just go to unmerge cells, and that will split it up. That will go ahead and divide that row back up. And just like we did in the Word one, we went ahead, made it all one, just to make it easier for your students to access that information. We've gone ahead and spelled out that 2. We put the week there and spelled out the month, because this all makes it clearer for your students. All right, PowerPoint. Transition now, because it is slightly different, because why would all of Microsoft and all of Google's things be exactly the same, right? And we know that some of you are putting tables in your PowerPoints, and that's fine. And we have provided links here again for using slides, for using PowerPoints, some Microsoft ones, but these are more specific to using slides and PowerPoint. So kind of more pointed. How do I fix the page break in the Google Docs? That is another one that you cannot fix. You have to just tell, you got to go through, and you will have to go back in and put it in. So that is the downfall. And that goes back to that where we said at the beginning that Google Docs and Microsoft really are not built to handle complex tables. And once you get to a table that's spanning a couple pages, that becomes, even though it might have just one header row, at that point, that's becoming a complex table. Some more table links, and so let's look at some. So here we have a table. What are our problems? We've had lots of conversations about problems and tables at this point. What are our problems in this table? What do we need to fix? Empty cell, absolutely. We got an empty cell here. We've got this one big cell here. Yeah, we've got this one big merge cell. We don't know if we have alt text. We don't know if it's been labeled. And so let's kind of look at that. So it's a little different to pull up the table properties in PowerPoint. You got to make sure you get the whole table selected. So you see how it's got the little circles at each corner and about halfway. That pulls it up, and we will go to our, if it wants to be more difficult than ever on me.
There you go. It's edit. It's just edit.
Yeah, edit alt text. Yeah. And that pops us up actually over here. And it will say Microsoft does have, you can tell it if it's decorative, but obviously if it's table, it's probably not decorative, but you can tell if it's decorative. So we know we need some alt text. And if we go to our table design, we know we don't have a header row marked. And so this chart suddenly becomes very different when we make it accessible, because they're trying to get across the point that insomnia, some treatment options, pain and depression, but here we have it a bit more easy to understand. We've gotten rid of that split cell. We've kind of paired out what goes where. We've provided that table information. There is our alt text. We have the alt text here. And if we go to table design, we've got that header row marked. So now the screen reader is going to read that for us well. So let's look at this one. So let's talk about, what do we need to add? What kind of things do we know we need to add? Some alt text, because I've got it up still. So it's like, I've got the easy one there. And for the sake of example, because we would need context to know what this is for, so I'm just going to go ahead and take our label here, you know, because it's going to depend on context what the alt text is going to be. Somebody said header file in the first column. I'm just going to say something like trial. You could do attempt, and then we've got this. Somebody said the merge cell, absolutely. So we know we need to split them, and we want one column but 2 cells, please. And so I'm going to go ahead and stick none here. And let's go to our table design. We know we need to mark a header row. And then what else do we need? We got one more thing we need to fix.
What the
numbers represent. Yeah. So we could do attempt 1. Oops. We could do attempt 2, 3, and 4. And then we'll bring my alt text over. It really wants to be difficult. There we go. And so now we have a table that is fully accessible. And that was, it didn't take us very long, but the impact's going to be big on your students. And so for the sake of comparison, we've got the Google slide, same thing. If you want to make a copy so you can make edits in your own, you just go to File, make a copy, and you're going to do the entire presentation. That way you have all the slides and all the goodies. And Kristen dropped in how to do it. And you certainly can later rename it, move it into another folder. But just like we had in the PDF, or not the PDF, the PowerPoint, all the links are again here for you. And we've done the same thing. We've got the same table, but the easiest way to do it through Google or through Slides is to use Grackle. Grackle Slides is free. You have to buy it for docs, but it is free for slides. There's also Grackle for Sheets. Those of you who are using Sheets, that is there. And there is a 30-day trial that's free for Sheets and docs, and just after that 30 days will lock you out. So, you know, if it's something you're like, I don't know if I like that or not, I want to try it, it is there.
There are individual licenses, just so you know, but honestly, if you can get your university to spring for it, it's much more cost effective to do it for an entire university.
Exactly. And so Grackle just yells at me and says, hey, Crystal, you've got some issues going on, and I can jump to it immediately, and it will drag me to it as soon as it thinks about it.
Yep, but you're on it.
And I'm on it, and it's got it highlighted, and it says, hey, I need you to tag me. And again, it works just like it did in Google Docs. And I can tell it, hey, I want you to mark that first row as header, and it will read. It tells it, hey, read that for me. And it tells me, hey, you've got merged cells. You need to fix that merged cell. And it goes ahead and highlights which one it is for me. So it does make it a little easier to fix because it takes you directly to the issue. And so again, we did the same thing. We just kind of made the same chart, went ahead, tagged the table. So if I hit table tag, it's going to think for a second, but it's already tagged. It's already going to read it in the right order. I've gone ahead and provided, because again, just like Google Docs, you can't provide alt text on tables in Google Slides. So we went ahead and made a header for it.
Crystal, you can in Slides.
Oh yeah, you can in Slides. You can in Docs, sorry.
Because of all these idiosyncrasies, it gets confusing. But yeah, there are some things, like we said, in Slides that aren't in Docs, and the same for PowerPoint versus Word.
Thank you.
They like to make it confusing for
all of us. And so we've got the same table. Let's talk about, we know we need to add in, we got to add in that header row. So we're going to say attempt. just like we did last time. Actually, I think I said trial last time. And then I put a temp down here. Oops, one too many. I know I need to split this cell, and it works literally the same way, just instead of split, it says unmerge. Same thing. And go ahead and bring that none down. And I'm gonna go ahead and get Grackle to tell me, hey, go ahead and tag that table.
Oh, you're on.
I'm on the wrong one.
Yep, it's gonna pull you to the last one above it.
There you go. I'm on it now.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm not.
It pulled you, yeah, that one right there.
There we go. Now I'm on it. And I'm gonna go ahead and mark that first row as header, and I'm telling you, hey, please read those things. And then I'm gonna go ahead and add my alt text, and all I gotta do to get to that, select the table, and if you notice, I've got the whole kind of blue outline going on, and I can do alt text, so I can add in, and I'm just gonna take the header that's there, plastic experiment, test results, and hit OK. And so now I've got alt text. And so now it will read that whole table for me. And that's really, like I said, this is the unfortunate thing about tagging tables in Google Docs and Google Slides is you have to use some sort of external add-on. It will not do it. There's no way through the interface to do it. So that is a downfall to using Google Docs and Google Slides, that you can't do it like you can in Word or PowerPoint.
And something a little bit different between Microsoft and Grackle would be, in Microsoft, you fix things here. In Grackle, you have to rerun or recheck in order for it to disappear or to show that it's been fixed.
Yeah,
so something to note, if you do use Grackle, don't get nervous like something wasn't fixed. It's just you have to recheck it. It doesn't automatically do it.
Yeah, but you see where I rechecked it and that the table I just fixed disappeared. So it does, you just click that recheck button and it does kind of give it back to you. All right. If we go back to our main slide deck, we do have some additional resources for you for tables. We had a couple questions yesterday about the big difference between AA and AAA. And so we did mock everybody up a document last night that kind of talks about the big differences between the two. So if you're somebody who's really interested in kind of digging deep on that, we got it's super long, it's one page, kind of additional reading, and then again we've got that how to kind of transition your course into accessible course content. Questions? We have a few minutes left. I'm trying to get us back to the start. We know it's a lot.
And if anyone else, I don't know, I did put it at Phyllis because Phyllis had questions about Excel, but if you do use Excel, I did give a couple links for resources regarding accessibility for those as well in the chat. So in PDF documents, we do have a resource on the handouts. So can you pull up one of the handouts, Crystal?
Yep.
I believe it's the last one in the handouts.
Yep, complex tables and PDFs.
Yeah, so complex tables, there is one, and it's talking about tagging. Now, I will tell you that tagging in PDF is not easy if you're not accustomed to it. It's going to take some time. I will tell you, we always suggest people start in, a Word or, Microsoft product and then, or Google and then export. Now, I will tell you, Grackle allows you, if you do have it, if you've tagged things, it should export your tags if you use Grackle to export, just so you're aware. But if you export it from the file option, it doesn't keep your tags. You have to do it from the actual add-on of Grackle. But there is, I will tell you, we've actually taken things that we've had correctly done and put it into a PDF, and it still didn't keep everything tagged properly in the PDF. So even if you're using the software to convert it, you do need to check your tags for accessibility and make sure that it is reading properly. So a complex table, again, is when you have more than one header row that is needed to associate cell data with to understand or interpret the data. But I would also say when it's spanning across pages, it's a different type of complex. It's not necessarily the complexity of, you know, having to associate it with multiple pieces of the table, but it's trying to make sure that you're still associating and keeping. Now, Word is the only way to do that. You can't do it in PowerPoint, in Slides, or in Google Docs. If you are doing it and you need it to span more than one, Word would probably be the best way to start so that you can make sure the header row repeats.
Anytime you're using anything, there's been a couple of comments about PDFs. Anytime you're using anything that is exporting to the PDF, you hope so much that the tags transfer, but you always want to check behind it, because they're machine generated captions, machine generated tags. You just have to check behind that just is how 508 is written. As long as you check through it, verify, yes, it's reading properly, you're good to go, but you want to check and make sure that it is.
Yeah, so that same thing, Carmen, if you're using something like a separate technology like LaTeX, even if it's getting pushed to the PDF, you still need to go through and run the accessibility checker and make sure it's tagged properly. I know it gets, though that's kind of why we didn't necessarily delve into all of the PDF stuff. It is very complex. There are multiple, you know, resources. You could check in LinkedIn Learning as well, to give you kind of a brief overview of how to do it if you're not as accustomed as well. Any other questions? It looks like we've got a few more minutes.
I think we lost Danny. That was Danny.
Oh no.
I muted him. Saved us all.
There, can we hear you now, Danny? Okay, well, if there are no other questions, we thank you for joining us today.
Yeah.
I'll try to close it out for Danny here. The table can it include links? It technically can, as long as it's associated. So like, again, you want to make sure you're not just putting stuff in a table to have it as a table, right? Why is the link need something from that table to be associated with? If not, I would put the link separately. If you are making something a link, make sure, and we'll kind of talk about this in the next two series about how to make accessible links, not just putting, unfortunately, when we are doing the links in the chat for Zoom, we can't make them accessible. They are the long URL. They are not where we're using descriptive text. And then, so we're kind of telling you, giving you some context about where it's going to bring you to. And we'll talk about that again coming this Friday and next week during the PowerPoint and Slides one.
If nobody's got any questions, thank you for spending your lunch break, probably for a lot of you, with us. And hopefully we will see you all on Friday.
Have a great day.